Now let's take into account the families back home, what it's like for women, what the family dynamic is like. Uh, by this time, we have discussed a number of different opportunities for women to grow into the workforce, especially in a few different industries, mostly revolving around nursing, social work, teaching, things along those lines. Still, a common theme around this era was that a woman's place is in the home. And it was especially reinforced in the Depression era because it was common at the time for people to believe that if there is one job in the family, the job should go to the husband. It should go to the father, the patriarch, or whatnot. So jobs should go to working men. So no woman whose husband has a job should also work. And therefore, you make the opportunity for other men to have jobs so as to be able to provide for their families. So while you have more women in the workforce, you do see a rise in the number of men working in so called traditional female roles because they needed jobs nonetheless. So you start to see kind of a backlash and a stepping back away from the idea of women being in the workplace and women being at home. That was really their thing. Um, Black women especially saw jobs dry up in the South. They became especially scarce and they earned even less than white women did. So it was especially tumultuous for them. As far as the family unit itself, the decade of the 1930s saw a lot of families splinter. And what broke families apart would often be the idea of maybe a father going to work as a migrant farmer elsewhere in the country and then coming back. Or maybe older brother goes with father to go do certain things. That was pretty typical and common at the time. And divorce rates actually dropped in the decade of the 1930s, largely because people couldn't afford to divorce. They didn't have any money. They couldn't afford to divorce. They didn't have anything to split in the first place. They couldn't really divorce. So they just stayed married as a matter of convenience and hoped for the best. Conversely, as well, or rather additionally, birth rates dropped. If you think about it, you don't need another mouth to feed. So you're not having kids when there's nothing to go around in the first place for what you already have. So birth rates began to plummet in the decade of the 1930s, and that affected a stagnation of population in the United States as well. Babies weren't being as born at as high a clip as they had been previously, and that's an issue. So the family took a hit, women took a hit, men as well saw an increase in depression rates and suicide rates in the decade of the 1930s as well. Think about it as a real staple of your machismo type society. Men take a lot of pride in being providers. And that's kind of ingrained in men in the first place, regardless of the era. Men take pride in being able to provide for their family and being able to do things that contribute towards their family's success. Well, if there aren't any jobs and you're broke and you're out of work, your ego's probably going to take a really big hit. You probably feel pretty bad about yourself. You get kind of depressed about your lack of opportunity, your lack of contribution to the family. You might disappear or you might commit suicide. A lot of that stuff happens to men around this era as well who take a real hit to their ego because they just can't do what they are hardwired to do as men. So that's also something to consider as well. So the era of the Great Depression was very difficult on women, families, and men.